Amarachi was only 21, but life had already shaped her into someone older than her age. After her parents passed away in a car accident, she was sent to live with her uncle and aunt in Lagos. They took her in, but not with warmth. In their house, she wasn't seen as family. She was more like a helper, someone who cleaned the floors, prepared meals, washed clothes, and ran errands from morning till night. While her cousins relaxed and scrolled on their phones, Amarachi was always in motion. Even when she came back tired from school, her aunt would point to a basket of laundry or an unwashed plate and say, "Stay useful. Don't expect anything in return." She never complained. She knew she had nowhere else to go. Her only escape was education. She studied late into the night, sometimes with a candle when power was out, hoping to one day change her life. Despite the stress, she excelled in school. Her teachers noticed her sharp mind, her calm spirit, and the way she always helped others without asking for credit. But at home, none of that mattered. She was the girl who brought the tray, the girl who waited until everyone else had eaten, the girl who never got invited into photos or family outings. Even during festive seasons, she was the one setting tables and refilling drinks while others danced and laughed. Sometimes, she'd watch her cousins get dressed for church or events while her aunt handed her a mop. Still, she kept going, holding on to hope. Deep inside, she believed something good had to come from all the pain and patience. But most days she felt invisible. People saw what she did but never saw her. And yet, Amarachi stayed kind, stayed grounded. What she didn't know was that life had been watching her quietly, and something unexpected was already on its way, something that would make everyone finally see her. One Saturday morning, while Amarachi was sweeping the front porch, her uncle called out from the living room. "We're having a small gathering next weekend," he said. "Family only. Good news to celebrate." Amarachi paused, wondering what the news could be. Her first thought went to her cousin, Chitty, who had just secured a tech job in Canada. Everyone had been talking about it for weeks. It made sense. Chitty was the star of the family, always praised, always favored. Amarachi smiled faintly and nodded. "Okay, sir," she said quietly. Later that day, her aunt handed her a long list. "Start planning," she ordered. "We'll need extra chairs, clean the guest room, and get fresh flowers. And don't forget, you're in charge of snacks and tea." Amarachi took the list without question. She wasn't surprised. Every family event came with the same role for her, behind the scenes. No one asked if she had exams or plans of her own. She always adjusted, always served. Throughout the week, she cleaned every corner of the house, arranged the chairs, and polished the glass table. She even ironed her cousins' outfits and helped her aunt shop for food. No one said thank you. Her feet ached each night, but she told herself it was just one more event. When Friday arrived, Amarachi stayed up late, baking pastries from scratch. The next morning, she woke up early to prepare fresh zobo and peppered meat. Her clothes were plain, just an old dress and slippers, because she assumed, like always, she wouldn't be needed in the photos. By noon, the house began to fill with people, uncles, aunties, neighbors. Everyone was dressed up, smiling and curious. Amarachi caught bits of conversation but nothing clear. As she placed trays on the side table, she overheard someone ask, "Is the girl here yet?" She didn't think much of it. Her mind was on boiling the next pot of tea. In her world, she was just the helper, the one behind the curtain. She had no idea the entire event was about her. The house was buzzing with energy. Her cousins were upstairs, laughing loudly, trying on different outfits, and arguing over who would take the best photos. Amarachi stood quietly in the kitchen, wiping the last set of clean glasses. She could hear their excitement, but none of it included her. Her aunt walked in, holding a tray and pointing at the pastries Amarachi had spent hours preparing. "Place these nicely, and don't forget the tea. You'll carry it in when everyone is seated," she instructed sharply. Amarachi nodded and began arranging everything carefully. The pastries were golden brown, the tea freshly brewed, the cups sparkling. She wanted it all to be perfect, even if no one would notice the effort behind it. As she reached for a napkin, her aunt turned to her again, this time with a warning tone. "Don't wander around. Just bring the tray when I call you. And please, don't speak unless someone asks. You're not part of this, understand?" Amarachi swallowed hard and nodded again. Her throat felt tight, but she kept her face calm. She looked down at her faded dress, the same one she wore for chores. No makeup, no jewelry, no chance of blending in with the others. In that moment, she felt like a stranger in a house she had lived in for years. She picked up the tray slowly, her hands steady but her heart heavy. As music played from the speakers and more guests arrived, Amarachi stayed tucked in the kitchen corner, quietly listening. Every now and then, someone walked past her without even a glance. The smell of jollof rice filled the air. Laughter echoed from the hallway. She leaned against the wall, watching time move slowly. She didn't ask questions, didn't interrupt. After all, she'd been told clearly, she wasn't part of it. But deep inside, she wondered, if she wasn't part of it, why did it feel like something inside was pulling her closer to the room? Something was coming, and though she didn't know what, her quiet world was about to change. Amarachi stood behind the kitchen door, peeking into the living room as more and more guests arrived. The room looked brighter than usual, decorated with flowers and shining plates. She noticed some faces she hadn't seen in a long time, extended family, neighbors, even people from her church. But what truly surprised her was the presence of her school principal, Mrs. Okafor. She blinked twice to be sure. Why would her principal come to a family event for her cousin? She quietly returned to the kitchen, confused but careful not to show it. Maybe the principal was a friend of her uncle's, she thought. Still, something didn't feel right. The house was too full, the mood too excited, and yet no one had mentioned the reason clearly. She started pouring tea into the cups, forcing her hands to stay steady even as her thoughts raced. From the hallway, she could hear little whispers. Somebody mentioned her name. Once, then again. She paused. Were they talking about her? She leaned closer to the door, but the voices faded before she could catch the full sentence. Her heart started to beat faster. Maybe she had forgotten to clean something, or maybe her food wasn't good enough. She shook the thought away and returned to the tray. There was no time to imagine things. She had been told to serve and stay out of the way. That was her place. Her aunt came in quickly. "They're ready. Bring the tea now," she said without looking her in the eye. Amarachi nodded and lifted the tray gently, balancing it with care. Her dress clung to her slightly from the heat, but she didn't think about that. She had only one focus, to do her part quietly and return to the kitchen. She stepped into the living room, eyes low, steps soft. Everyone turned to look. She thought it was just because of the tea. But as she walked further in, she didn't know that in just seconds, everything she believed about herself, her worth, her place, was about to change forever. Amarachi stepped slowly into the living room, holding the tray with both hands. The clinking of the teacups was the only sound she could hear over the loud beat of her heart. Everyone was seated now, her relatives, family friends, even her teachers. She didn't look up. She had trained herself to stay invisible in moments like this. Her focus was on the tray, making sure nothing spilled. She moved toward her aunt, planning to set it on the center table like always. But just as she reached the middle of the room, a voice broke through the quiet hum of conversation. It was calm but firm. "Why is the celebrant holding the tray?" Amarachi froze. Her hands stiffened around the tray. For a second, she wasn't sure she heard correctly. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. Slowly, she lifted her head, and there stood her school principal, Mrs. Okafor, looking directly at her with a small smile. Confused, Amarachi looked to her aunt, then to her uncle, hoping someone would explain. Her aunt's expression shifted from control to panic. Her uncle opened his mouth but said nothing. The silence was heavy. "I said," the principal repeated gently. "Why is Amarachi, the celebrant, serving tea at her own celebration?" Gasps filled the room. Someone in the back clapped. A few guests turned to each other, whispering. Amarachi's hands began to tremble. She quickly placed the tray down on the table before she dropped it. She stared at her principal, her mind racing. Celebrant? What celebration? She looked down at her plain dress, then around the room. For the first time, the decorations, the guests, and the energy made sense. But her name? Her name had never been the reason for any gathering before. Her principal walked over to her slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't know?" she asked softly. Amarachi could only shake her head, her eyes wide, her chest tightening. The tray might have been out of her hands, but everything else, her story, her silence, the room was completely silent. Even the children who had been running around stopped to look. Amarachi stood frozen beside the tea tray, her hands now empty but her heart pounding in her chest. Her aunt looked around, clearly caught off guard, her mouth slightly open. She forced a weak smile, trying to act like she knew what was going on, but the confusion on her face said it all. Mrs. Okafor stepped forward with a folder in her hand. She opened it slowly, glanced at the crowd, then cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice calm but full of meaning, "we are gathered here to celebrate a young woman whose humility, intelligence, and innovation have touched lives far beyond this house." All eyes turned to Amarachi. "She didn't know about this," the principal added, "because we wanted it to be a surprise. And today, it is my honor to officially announce that Amarachi Ease has been named Nigeria's top female tech innovator under 25. Gasps filled the room. Somebody dropped a phone. Others clapped in shock. Amarachi's eyes widened. Her lips parted in disbelief. Mrs. Okafor continued, smiling proudly now. Amarachi built a water purification system from recycled parts. Her project was submitted by her teachers without her knowledge. It went through rounds of judging. She won. She will receive a full university scholarship, a funding grant to develop her invention, and an international mentorship program that includes travel to 3 countries. People turned to Amarachi, some with open mouths, others shaking their heads in amazement. Her uncle awkwardly began clapping. Her aunt's hands stayed still on her lap. No one had expected this. Certainly not the girl who had just entered the room with tea. Amarachi's knees felt weak. She could barely understand what she was hearing. For years, she had worked in silence. No praise, no attention. And now, suddenly, the room she thought she didn't belong in was clapping for her. A celebration she had prep. Amarachi's hands were trembling so badly that she couldn't feel the tray anymore. It slipped from her fingers and crashed softly onto the floor, cups clinking, but no one seemed to care. Her eyes were wide, her body frozen in place. Felt like a dream or a mistake. Maybe they had confused her with someone else. But the smiles, the applause, the warmth in her principal's voice made it all real. Her uncle quickly stood up and forced a smile, trying to look like he had always known. "That's our girl," he said loudly, as if he had played a role in her success. Her aunt started clapping too, but the stiffness in her hands showed she wasn't sure how to react. Her eyes couldn't meet Amarachi's, but the rest of the room had already chosen their side. People stood from their seats and moved toward Amarachi with wide smiles and stretched arms. Some took her hand and shook it proudly. Others brought out their phones and started taking photos, calling her name with joy. "Amarachi, look here. Smile. This is your day." Flash after flash lit up her face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in the background. She was the reason they were all here. Her cousin, Chitty, who had been bragging for weeks about his job abroad, stepped back quietly. His face was unreadable, but his eyes told the truth. Shock, confusion, and a bit of shame. All the attention he expected was now centered on the one person he'd always ignored. Amarachi tried to speak, but no words came out. Her chest was tight with emotion, a strange mix of happiness, disbelief, and a lifetime of held-back tears. She wasn't used to this, to being seen, to being celebrated. And yet, the crowd didn't stop. More people came forward, offering hugs, congratulations, and admiration. The same hands that had once waved her away were now reaching to lift her higher. And in that moment, standing in the same clothes she wore to clean the house, Amarachi finally realized her light could no longer be hidden. As the noise settled and people took their seats again, Mrs. Okafor walked to the front with a proud smile. She looked at Amarachi, then turned to the guests. "Let me tell you how this all happened," she said. Amarachi didn't even know she had been entered for the competition. Her school did it behind her back, because she never brags, never asks for attention, and never expects praise. The guests leaned in as she continued. Amarachi designed a simple but powerful water purification system using scrap materials she collected from her late father's village. She tested it at school, and when the science teachers saw how effective it was, they brought it to our attention. We submitted it to a national youth innovation program, and Amarachi's project went straight to the top. The room broke into murmurs of surprise. Mrs. Okafor smiled. She was selected not just for her invention, but for her spirit. In every interview, her teachers said the same thing. She works quietly, helps others, and never looks for applause. That's why the organizers were so moved. They decided she was the kind of leader Nigeria needs. That's why this event was planned. To celebrate her. Amarachi stood still, her heart pounding. She remembered the day she had put that device together. Bending wires, cutting bottles, filtering dirty water drop by drop. Not for fame, but just to solve a problem. She never thought anyone noticed. Her eyes began to sting with tears. She had spent so long thinking she was invisible, that her efforts didn't matter. But all along, someone had been watching. Not to judge her, but to lift her. Her teachers believed in her even when her own family didn't. They had carried her story to a place she couldn't reach alone. And now, here she was, being celebrated not for her beauty, not for money, but for her mind, her heart, and her quiet strength. For the first time, she felt like she belonged in the spotlight. As the applause softened, one of the guests stood and gently asked Amarachi to say a few words. The room went quiet again, all eyes turning to her. She hesitated. Her hands were still a little shaky, her apron stained from tea and hours of work in the kitchen. She hadn't prepared anything. She hadn't even known the day was about her. Slowly, she stepped forward, her voice small at first but steady. I thought I was just here to serve tea, she said, her eyes scanning the faces around her. I didn't know that kindness and hard work were being watched all along. The room fell completely silent. Then someone whispered, "Wow, I always tried to stay out of the way," she continued. "I never expected much. I only knew how to help, how to do my best with what I had. Even when no one noticed." She paused, then smiled softly. "But now I see that even when you think no one is looking, someone is, and that sometimes your quiet efforts are louder than you think." Everyone stood. A full standing ovation. Some clapped through tears. Others just looked at her with deep admiration. In that moment, Amarachi wasn't just the girl in the apron. She was the reason they had gathered, the one being honored for her brilliance and spirit. She glanced at her aunt, who remained seated, her hands clasped tightly, eyes cast down. There was no smile on her face, only the quiet weight of shame. She had dressed Amarachi to serve, not knowing she was dressing a star. Even her cousins lowered their eyes, realizing the girl they'd overlooked had become the one everyone celebrated. Amarachi stepped back, overwhelmed but peaceful. For once, she didn't shrink. She didn't hide. She stood tall in her old dress and apron, and reclaimed her place, not just in the room, but in the story of her own life. Just a few days after the celebration, Amarachi stood at the airport with a small suitcase in one hand and her passport in the other. Her clothes were simple, but her heart was full. She was about to board a flight for the very first time, not as someone's assistant, not as someone in the background, but as a guest of honor. She had been chosen to represent Nigeria at an international youth innovation conference in South Africa. Her name was now known beyond her school, beyond her street, even beyond Lagos. When she arrived, journalists were waiting. Her story had already gone viral online. Photos of the moment she dropped the tea tray, the announcement, her emotional speech. Everyone wanted to meet the girl who thought she was just a servant, only to discover she was the star. She wore a modest dress, her natural hair packed neatly, and around her neck hung a small necklace her mother had once given her. She kept it close as a reminder of where she came from. At the conference, she sat beside other young inventors from different countries. When it was her turn to speak, the announcer smiled and said, "Please welcome Amarachi Ease, the girl who served tea at her own celebration, and now serves the world through innovation." The hall erupted in applause. Amarachi walked up to the stage slowly, her heart calm, her hands steady. This time there was no tray, no one looking down on her, just eyes filled with respect and admiration. She looked into the cameras, smiled gently, and began to speak. Her voice was clear and confident. She didn't try to sound perfect, she just spoke her truth. And far away in Lagos, her school, her teachers, and even her aunt watched from their TV screens. She was no longer just the quiet girl in the kitchen. She had stepped into her future, fully seen, fully heard, and finally, fully celebrated. Her story had come full circle and the world was now listening.